Hi guys. Tonight, we are going to lean back and let the world outside fade away into a soft, hazy blur. We are going to explore a topic that is both strangely specific and remarkably quiet. The weirdest etiquette rules that 1950s housewives had to follow. This isn't a story of grand battles or sweeping political shifts. Instead, we are looking at the history of the quiet, everyday life, the hidden social expectations that governed the domestic world. We're going to step into a time where the primary goal was the preservation of a perfect, polished image, and where the rules of the home were as strict as any law. So, adjust your pillows. Make sure your blankets are tucked in just right. Take a deep, slow breath in and let it out. Imagine, if you will, a quiet street in the mid-1950s. It is very early. The sun hasn't quite crested the horizon yet, but the sky is turning that pale, milky shade of blue-gray that precedes the dawn. The street is lined with young trees and identical lawns, each blade of grass heavy with a silver coat of dew. We are entering a house on this street. It is a house that smells faintly of lemon wax and lavender sachet. It is a place where every object has its designated spot, and where the silence of the morning is only broken by the rhythmic, steady tick, 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 tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway in a bedroom upstairs. The light is beginning to filter through the heavy, floral-patterned drapes. It's a soft, diffused light that catches the dust motes dancing in the air. Helen lies still in her bed. She doesn't move immediately. She listens to the house, the wood settling, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen below. She is awake before the alarm clock, a habit born of years of practice. In this era, the first rule of etiquette for a housewife was perhaps the most invisible one. She must never be seen in a state of disarray, even here. In the privacy of her own bedroom, there is an expectation. Helen knows that she must rise before her husband, Arthur. It is considered a breach of domestic duty for a wife to be seen by her husband with muddled eyes or unbrushed hair. She slides out from under the heavy wool blankets, her feet finding the plush, pink slippers waiting on the rug. The floorboards are cool, but the rug is soft and comforting. She moves with a practiced feline grace, careful not to let the springs of the mattress creak. She approaches the vanity. The wood is a dark, polished mahogany, cool to the touch. On its surface sits a silver-backed brush and comb set, a crystal tray of bobby pins, and a small porcelain jar of cold cream. The first strange rule of her day begins now. The mask of the perfect wife must be applied before the coffee is even ground. Helen spends several minutes in front of the mirror. She applies a light dusting of powder to take away the shine of sleep. She pinches her cheeks to bring back the color. She brushes her hair, which was set in tight rollers the night before, until it falls into a soft, controlled wave that rests just above her collar. She looks at her reflection. She is composed. She is presentable. Only now, according to the etiquette manuals of 1954, is she ready to begin her day as the manager of the household. Helen descends the stairs. Each step is a soft thud on the carpet runner. The kitchen is her domain, a space of chrome and pastel enamel. The linoleum floor is a pale mint green, polished to such a high shine that it reflects the legs of the kitchen. Table like a still pond. She begins the process of breakfast. There is a specific rhythm to it. The heavy clink of the glass milk bottles delivered to the porch. The rhythmic scraping of a wooden spoon against the side of a ceramic mixing bowl. The etiquette books of the time, such as those written by Amy Vanderbilt, emphasized that the kitchen was not just a place for work, but a place of performance. A housewife was expected to maintain a cheerful atmosphere regardless of the hour. A wife's primary goal is to ensure the home is a sanctuary of peace for her husband. Her own fatigue or morning lethargy must be hidden behind a bright smile and a tidy apron. Helen ties the strings of her apron. It is a crisp, white cotton with a small embroidered rose in the corner. It is perfectly In the 1950s, an apron wasn't just for protection. It was a uniform. It signaled that the office was open. She sets the table. This is an art form in itself. The fork goes to the left, the knife to the right, with the blade facing in. The napkin must be folded into a precise rectangle. The salt and pepper shakers must be full and placed exactly 2 inches from the center of the table. She hears Arthur moving upstairs. The sound of the shower, the muffled thump of a suitcase. She ensures the toast is browned to a specific shade of gold. This is the quiet pressure of the era. The idea that a burnt piece of toast or a misaligned spoon was not just a mistake, but a sign of a failing domestic character. Once Arthur has left for the day and the house has settled back into its morning silence, the real work begins. But the etiquette rules don't stop once the husband is gone. In fact, they become more complex. In the 1950s, a housewife's day was divided into shifts. The morning was for heavy cleaning, scrubbing floors, washing linens, dusting the baseboards. However, the rules stated that all dirty work must be completed and hidden by noon. As the sun climbs higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the living room rug, Helen begins her cleaning. She uses a heavy, upright vacuum cleaner that roars with a low-frequency hum, vibrating through the soles of her shoes. She moves it in slow, deliberate lines across the carpet. She polishes the silver. She uses a soft flannel cloth and a pungent paste that smells of chemicals and old coins. She rubs in circular motions, watching as the tarnish disappears to reveal a mirror-like finish. But as the clock nears 12, a transition must occur. The etiquette manuals suggested that after midday, a housewife should change her clothes. The work apron is replaced by a hostess apron, something daintier, perhaps made of sheer organza or lace. She must wash the scent of cleaning supplies from her hands and replace it with a hint of floral perfume. The house must look as if it cleaned itself. The vacuum is tucked away in the deepest corner of the closet. The cleaning rags are rinsed and hidden. By 1 p.m., Helen must be sitting in the living room, perhaps with a book or a piece of knitting, looking as though she has spent the entire morning in leisure. This was the rule of effortless perfection. To show the labor was to admit that the home was a place of toil rather than a place of rest. The afternoon brings the possibility of visitors. In the 1950s, the drop-in visit was a common social occurrence, and it carried its own set of rigid expectations. Helen hears the chime of the doorbell. It's a 2-tone ring that echoes through the hallway. She takes a quick breath and checks her reflection in the hallway mirror. Rule: a housewife must always be at home to guests. Even if she is in the middle of a task, it was considered the height of rudeness to not answer the door, or to answer it looking undone. If a neighbor stopped by for a chat, Helen was expected to lead them into the parlor, offer a seat, and immediately provide refreshment. The coffee hour was a ritual of subtle judgment. As she pours the coffee into thin, translucent china cups, she is being observed. Is the coffee too weak? Is the saucer chipped? Is there a stray hair on her shoulder? The conversation must remain light. Etiquette dictated that a housewife should avoid heavy topics: politics, money, or personal grievances. Instead, she should speak of the garden, the local school board, or new recipes found in the pages of Ladies' Home Journal. There is a slow, rhythmic quality to these visits. The clink of a silver spoon against porcelain, the soft rustle of a silk skirt, the ticking of the clock on the mantel. It is a dance of politeness, a way of reinforcing the social fabric of the neighborhood. One cup of sugar at a time. As the afternoon shadows lengthen and the light turns to a warm, honey-colored amber, the house begins to shift again. The evening preparation is the final act of the day's etiquette. Between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., the atmosphere of the home must change from a workspace to a sanctuary. The lights are dimmed slightly. The curtains are drawn to create a sense of intimacy. There is a very famous and quite strange rule found in many 1950s home economics textbooks: the 5-minute reset. 5 minutes before the husband was expected to arrive home, the wife was encouraged to take a moment for herself. She was told to take a deep breath, touch up her lipstick, and put a ribbon in her hair. She was instructed to be a listener, to prepare herself to hear about his day, without burdening him with the petty details of hers. Helen stands in the kitchen, the oven casting a warm glow on the floor. She has prepared a pot roast. The scent is rich and savory carrots, onions, and slow-cooked beef. She hears the car pull into the driveway. The engine cuts out, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. She smooths her dress. She ensures that children, if they were home, are washed and quiet. She stands near the door, not in a way that seems anxious, but in a way that seems welcoming. This is the peak of the 1950s. Etiquette, the grand entrance of the provider. The home is the stage, and Helen is the director, the lead actress, and the stagehand all at once. Dinner is a quiet affair. The clatter of cutlery on plates is the only music. The etiquette of the dinner table is precise. No elbows on the table. Pass the salt and pepper together as a pair, never separately. Wait until everyone is served before taking the first bite. The house remains held in a soft, amber stillness as the afternoon deepens. The shadows of the oak trees outside stretch long and thin across the manicured lawn, reaching toward the white siding of the house like slow, dark fingers. Inside, the air is cool and smells of lavender-scented furniture polish and the faint, metallic temps of the electric iron dot. Helen stands in the center of her bedroom. The heavy floral drapes are half-drawn, bathing the room in a muted, dusty gold light. It is nearly 4 o'clock. The morning chores are a memory. The heavy scrubbing and the lifting and the reaching, all tucked away behind closed closet doors. Now begins the most delicate part of her day, the transition into the evening image. There is a weight to this silence, not a heavy weight, but a persistent one. It is the weight of the mirror. She moves toward her vanity once more. The mahogany is smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She sits down on the small, velvet-upholstered stool, her movements slow and deliberate. She gazes at her reflection, not with vanity, but with the clinical eye of a diamond polisher looking for a flaw in this era. The face was a canvas that belonged to the household. An etiquette rule, whispered through the pages of every women's magazine and reinforced by the nodding heads of neighbors, was absolute. A housewife's face must never be blank. To be seen without makeup was considered a sign of a letting oneself go, a moral failing disguised as a cosmetic one. Helen picks up a small, heavy jar of foundation. The glass is cold against her palm. She unscrews the lid, and the scent powdery, floral, and slightly medicinal fills the small space between her and the mirror. She applies it with rhythmic, sweeping motions. She watches as the faint redness around her nose disappears. She watches as the tiny lines of fatigue near her eyes are filled and smoothed over. She is erasing the day. She is erasing the heat of the stove and the chill of the cellar. Her hands move with the mechanical grace of a clockmaker. Next comes the powder. She uses a large fluffy puff, dabbing it into a circular box of fine rose-tinted dust. She presses it into her skin, watching the soft cloud of powder dance in the shafts of sunlight. The puff makes a soft, rhythmic thump, thump against her cheek. It is a soothing sound, a repetitive sound, thump, thump. She is becoming the image again. Once the skin is perfected, she turns her attention to her hair. In the 1950s, hair was not meant to move. It was an architectural feat, a structure of waves and curls that signaled discipline. Helen picks up her silver-backed brush. The bristles are stiff and cool. She begins to brush out the curls she set earlier in the day. The sound is a soft, rhythmic hush. Hush, hush. As the brush passes through the strands, she remembers the rule she read in a handbook, given to her by her mother. A hair out of place is a thought out of place. She uses a long, thin-handled comb to carve a precise part on the left side of her head. It is a straight, white line against the scalp. She then begins the process of pinning. She takes a bobby pin, sliding it between her lips to open it, a habit she knows is technically against the finer rules of etiquette, but one that feels grounding in the silence. The pins go in, one by one. Click, 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 she sculpts. The waves around her ears. She checks the back of her head using a small hand mirror, tilting it until she can see the infinite reflection of her own neck. Every strand must be tucked. Every curl must be symmetrical. She reaches for the hairspray. The pressurized can feels heavy and cold. As she presses the nozzle, a fine, sticky mist descends, settling over her head like a glass dome. It smells of alcohol and synthetic carnations. She waits for it to dry, sitting perfectly still. She does not blink. She does not move. She is a statue in the golden afternoon light, waiting for the lacquer to set her identity for the evening dot. Now she must address the dress. In the 1950s, the wardrobe was a clock. You did not wear the same clothes at 4 p.m. that you wore at 10 a.m. To do so was to admit that your day was a blur of labor rather than a curated series of events. Helen stands and walks to her closet. The hinges creak with a low, familiar moan. Inside, the dresses hang in a neat, colorful row, like soldiers on parade. She removes her house dress, a simple, faded cotton shirtwaist with a small coffee stain near the hem that only she knows about. She unbuttons it slowly. The buttons are small and pearlescent, clicking softly against one another as the fabric falls away. She reaches for her afternoon and evening dress. It is a deep, forest green silk with a full skirt and a cinched waist. The fabric is heavy and cool as she slips it over her head. The silk rustles her sound like dry leaves skittering across a sidewalk. She zips the back. It is a long, metal zipper that requires her to reach behind her shoulder, a small struggle she performs every day. Once it is closed, the dress changes her posture. It pulls her shoulders back. It narrows her waist. It dictates how she must breathe, shallow, steady, and calm. She returns to the mirror to check the hem. She smooths the skirt with the palms of her hands, a repetitive, downward motion, smooth. and breathe, smooth, and breathe. The etiquette manuals were very specific about the housewife's silhouette. A woman was expected to look fresh. Freshness was a quality that required constant maintenance. It meant no wrinkles in the skirt. It meant no scuffs on the shoes. It meant a total absence of the physical reality of housework. She steps into her heels. They are modest, 2-inch pumps in a matching dark green. The sound of her footsteps changes immediately. No longer the soft thud of slippers, but the sharp, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a woman who is ready. There is a strange, quiet pressure in this routine. It is the pressure of the perpetual Ghazi. Even when Helen is alone in the house, she feels as though she is being watched by the neighbors through the sheer curtains, by the ghost of her mother's expectations, and by the society that demands her perfection as a payment for her security. She walks through the house, performing what she calls the mirror check. She stops at the mirror in the hallway. She adjusts her collar. She stops at the mirror in the dining room. She checks her lipstick. She stops at the glass of the china cabinet. She ensures her slip isn't showing. Each check is a small ritual of reassurance. I am still here. I am still perfect. I am still prepared. The rule that haunted the 1950s housewife was perhaps the most exhausting of all. A housewife should never be seen by her husband looking tired or unprepared. Tiredness was seen as a form of unpreparedness. To look tired was to suggest that the burden of the home was too much. To look tired was to fail in the primary duty of being a refreshing sight for the man returning from the real world. Helen feels a flicker of exhaustion in the small of her back, a dull ache from the morning's laundry. She pushes it down. She softens her eyes. She practices a look of composed alertness in the hallway mirror. She relaxes her jaw. She tilts her head. She must look as though she has spent the day floating through the rooms, perhaps occasionally touching a flower or reading a line of poetry. Rather than scrubbing the grout in the bathroom with a toothbrush, the house is very dark now, except for the golden pools of light from the lamps she has begun to turn on. She moves into the living room. She plumped the cushions on the sofa earlier, and she finds herself hesitant to sit down and disturb the perfect, symmetrical indentations. Instead, she stands by the window, watching the street lamps flicker to life one by one. The world outside is turning a deep, velvety indigo. She hears the distant sound of a lawnmower, a low, rhythmic drone that sounds like a giant bumblebee. It is a peaceful sound, the sound of a neighborhood being tucked in. She looks at her hands. They are pale and smooth, smelling of the expensive rosewater lotion she applied after the cleaning was done. There is no trace of the dishwater. There is no trace of the dust. This is the effortless part of effortless perfection. The effort must be invisible. The labor must be silent. The perfection must seem as natural as the sunset. She thinks of the etiquette book on her nightstand. It told her that a wife's smile is the hearth of the home. She practices that smile. It is a small, quiet curve of the lips. It doesn't reach her eyes, but it doesn't have to. It only has to be there, a steady, flickering flame of politeness. The clock on the mantel, a heavy brass piece under a glass dome, chimes the half-hour bong. The sound vibrates through the room, a low, resonant frequency that settles in the marrow of her bones. She goes to the kitchen to check the oven one last time. The heat is a dry, comforting weight against her face. She uses a thick, quilted oven mitt to slide the rack out. The roast is sizzling, softly rhythmic hiss. pop, hiss. She checks her reflection in the chrome of the toaster. Even here, in the heat of the kitchen, she is composed. Her hair has not wilted. Her lipstick is a perfect, sharp red. The rule of the 5-minute reset approaches. She returns to the bathroom. She splashes her wrists with cold water, a trick to stay alert. She dabs a bit more perfume behind her ears. The scent is Evening in Paris, a heavy, sophisticated fragrance that feels like a costume in itself. She stands in the center of the hallway, listening. The quiet of the house is absolute. It is a clean quiet, a polished quiet. The clock on the mantel, encased in its heavy glass dome, strikes 5. The sound is a low, singular chime that vibrates through the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of Helen's sensible daytime flats. It is the signal. The atmosphere of the house, which had been suspended in a sort of midday trance, begins to shift. This is the hour of the quiet reset. The final transformation before the domestic stage is set for its primary audience. In the 1950s, the late afternoon was not a time for winding down. For the housewife, it was the most critical window of the day. There was an unspoken, yet deeply felt, rule that governed this hour. The transition from worker to hostess must be seamless and absolute. Helen stands in the center of the living room. The sun is lower now, casting long slanted rectangles of gold across the carpet. She moves with a slow, practiced grace to the windows. She grips the heavy cord of the drapes of thick, braided silk and pulls. The sound is a soft, rhythmic swish. Swish, swish, as the fabric slides across the brass rod. The bright, demanding light of the outside world is filtered away, replaced by a soft, amber glow. She begins the ritual of the final sweep. Even though she has cleaned all morning, the house must be checked for the sins of the day. She carries a small lint-free cloth in her apron pocket. She walks to the coffee table, a low piece of dark wood polished to a mirror shine. She bends down, her knees creaking softly in the silence, and breathes a tiny cloud of mist onto the surface. She wipes, round and round, round and round. She is looking for a stray fingerprint, a single mote of dust that might have settled since the noon hour. In the etiquette of the time, a dusty surface was more than a cleaning oversight. It was a sign of a cluttered mind, a lack of respect for the sanctuary she was tasked to maintain as she moves through the house. Helen performs the quiet tidy. She plumps the sofa cushions, hitting them with the side of her hand thumping till they are smooth and mountainous. She straightens the magazines on the side table, aligning the edges of Life and Reader's Digest so they are perfectly parallel to the table's edge. There is a strange, meditative quality to this repetition. Straighten, smooth, check, straighten, smooth, check. The goal is to remove any evidence that work has occurred. The vacuum cleaner, which had been her constant companion 3 hours ago, is now locked away in the dark depths of the hall closet. The damp rags are drying in the basement, out of sight. The scent of bleach and ammonia, which had defined her morning, must now be neutralized. She lights a single candle on the sideboard. It isn't for a celebration. It is for the scent. It smells of vanilla and sandalwood. She watches the flame for a moment, a tiny, flickering point of heat in the cool room. The rule of the era was clear. The home must smell of nothing but freshness and dinner. The smell of the labor required to create that freshness was considered unrefined. Helen walks back to the kitchen. The roast is in the final stages of its slow descent into tenderness. The oven door is heavy, the metal handle warm to the touch. She opens it just a crack. The air that escapes is thick and savory, the scent of browning fats and rosemary. This is the approved scent. It signals to a man, the moment he crosses the threshold, that his needs have been anticipated. Now comes the most personal part of the transition. Helen retreats to the bedroom. The house dress, the sturdy washable garment she has worn, all day must be retired. It carries the faint, invisible weight of the day's tasks. It is the uniform of the servant, and at 5:30 p.m., Helen must become the queen. She unbuttons the cotton dress. The fabric is slightly stiff from the starch. As she lets it fall, she feels a brief cooling sensation against her skin. She hangs it on the back of the door, hidden from view. She approaches the closet. This is the evening choice. In the 1950s, the after-5 dress was a specific category of existence. It had to be feminine, but not flashy. It had to be formal enough to honor the husband's return, but practical enough to allow for the final serving of a meal. She selects a navy blue crepe dress with a wide, white lace collar. The fabric is soft, with a subtle grain that feels like sand against her fingertips. She slides it over her head. The silk lining is cool, and the dress falls around her with a quiet whoosh. She stands before the full-length mirror. She fastens a string of pearls around her neck. The clasp is small, a tiny silver tongue that clicks into a groove. The pearls are cool against the hollow of her throat, slowly warming to the temperature of her skin. She checks her silhouette. The waist is singed. The skirt flares. She looks like the illustration in a Sears catalog. She looks like a woman who has had a lovely, quiet day. She picks up her lipstick, a shade called Evening Ember. She applies it slowly, watching the mirror, left, right, press, left, right, press. The pressure behind the smile is there. A soft tension in the corners of her mouth, but she smooths it over with the red wax. The rule she must follow now is perhaps the most emotionally demanding of all. She must greet her husband warmly at the door, no matter how she feels, regardless of the headache blooming behind her eyes, or the fact that she hasn't spoken to another adult for 9 hours, or the quiet, gnawing loneliness that sometimes drifts through the house like the dust she spends her day chasing. All of it must be pushed down. She must be the hearth. At 5:50 p.m., the house is ready. The lights in the hallway are dimmed. The kitchen timer is set. The ice is in the bucket for the evening drink, the cubes clicking against the glass like dice. Helen stands in the foyer. This is the vigil. The etiquette guides of the 1950s often spoke of this time as a moment for spiritual preparation. A wife was encouraged to use these last few minutes to discard her own worries so she could be a clean slate for her husband's frustrations. She stands perfectly still. She can hear the house settling. A floorboard in the dining room gives a tiny, rhythmic creak. The refrigerator in the kitchen hums its low, steady drone. She watches the hands of the clock. Tick, tick, tick. She feels the emotional restraint like a garment. It is as tight as the corset beneath her dress, holding her upright, keeping her edges sharp. There is a quiet, rhythmic tension in her breathing. Inhale, hold, exhale. She thinks of the smile she is about to give. It is a practiced smile. It is a smile that says, everything is under control. You are safe. The world is exactly as it should be. She hears the sound of a car turning into the street. She knows the sound of that engine. It is a low, throaty rumble that grows louder, then softer, then stops. The car door slams. Thud. The sound echoes through the quiet neighborhood. It is the sound of the end of the day. Helen moves to the mirror in the foyer one last time. She touches the lace collar. She pinches her earlobes to bring a flush of color to them. She adjusts the red of her lips. She stands 3 feet from the door. Not too close, so as to seem desperate. Not too far, so as to seem indifferent. She hears the footsteps on the porch. Click, click, click. The sound of leather on wood. The key enters the lock. The door opens. A rush of the outside world enters, the scent of exhaust. The chill of the evening breeze. The sound of a distant neighbor calling a dog. Arthur enters. He looks tired. His suit is slightly rumpled, his tie loosened by half an inch. Helen steps forward. Her skirt rustles, a soft, dry sound. "Hello, darling," she says. Her voice is like velvet. It is a voice she has curated specifically for this moment. It is slow, calm, and entirely devoid of her own day. She reaches out to take his briefcase. The leather is warm from his hand, heavy with papers and the weight of the city. She takes his coat, her fingers brushing against the wool. Rule: never ask him what's for dinner, or complain about the household bills until he has had a chance to sit and decompress. She leads him into the living room, the room she has spent the last hour perfecting. He sits in his chair, the chair with the plumped cushions. He sighs, a long, heavy sound that seems to deflate the tension in the room. Helen stands by his side for a moment. She doesn't speak. She doesn't demand his attention. She simply exists as a calming presence. She is the domestic buffer. She goes to the kitchen to fetch the drink. The the glass is cold. As she walks back, she catches her reflection in the dark glass of the window. For a split second, she doesn't recognize the woman in the navy dress with the pearls. The woman looks so calm, so perfect, so entirely untouched by the world. She brings him the drink. She places it on the coaster, the one she aligned perfectly at 5:15 p.m. Was the traffic difficult today? She asks softly. She listens as he speaks. She watches his face. She nods at the correct intervals. This is the emotional labor. She is absorbing his day, pulling the stress from his shoulders and tucking it into the corners of the room where she will clean it away tomorrow. Dinner is served at 6:30 p.m. The table is a landscape of white linen and silver. The candles are lit now, their flames tall and steady in the still air. The etiquette of the meal is a slow, rhythmic dance. The lifting of the fork, the dabbing of the napkin, the quiet, measured conversation. Helen feels the fatigue in her legs now, a dull, pulsing heat. But she sits upright. She keeps her elbows off the table. She ensures Arthur's water glass is never more than half empty. There is a soft tension beneath it all, the tension of maintaining the perfect scene. The transition from the kitchen to the dining room is a silent, choreographed ballet. It is 6:29 p.m. In exactly 60 seconds, the evening meal must begin. This was the unwritten law of the mid-century household, the chronometer of the kitchen. To serve a meal early was to seem rushed and unpolished. To serve it late was a sign of organizational failure that disrupted the master of the house's evening of rest. Helen stands by the stove, her posture straight, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. The air in the kitchen is heavy, warm, and fragrant. It carries the scent of slow-roasted beef, the sharp, earthy temps of boiled carrots, and the yeasty sweetness of dinner rolls. Warming in a linen-lined basket, She watches the second hand of the kitchen clock, a white, circular face with bold black numbers. Tick, tick, tick. She feels the heat from the oven against her shins. A steady, pulsing warmth that contrasts with the cool, starched lace of her collar. She waits for the precise moment when the large hand touches the 6 and the small hand touches the 12. There she moves. The dining room is a separate world, partitioned off from the utilitarian heat of the kitchen. Here, the air is cooler and smells faintly of lemon-scented beeswax and old silver. Helen begins the final check of the table setting. In the 1950s, the dinner table was not just a place to eat. It was a mathematical proof of a woman's domestic competence. Every object had a coordinate. Every piece of silver had a destiny. She looks down at the white damask tablecloth. It is heavy, with a subtle woven pattern of ivy leaves that only reveals itself when the light hits it at a certain angle. There is not a single wrinkle. She had spent 45 minutes that morning with a heavy steam iron, smoothing the fabric until it lay across the mahogany table like a sheet of fresh snow. She checks the alignment of the covers, the individual places where each person sits. The rule of the 1-inch margin is absolute. Each plate, each piece of cutlery, and each napkin must sit exactly 1 inch from the edge of the table. Helen uses the first joint of her thumb to measure, a silent, repetitive ritual. Measure, adjust, smooth. Measure, adjust, smooth. To the left of the large porcelain dinner plate lies the fork. It is heavy silver, cool to the touch. Its tines are perfectly straight, pointing toward the ceiling. To the right of the plate lies the knife, its sharpened blade turned inward, facing the porcelain, a gesture of peace and safety. Beside the knife sits the teaspoon, its bowl reflecting the overhead chandelier like a tiny, distorted mirror. The napkin is a crisp, white rectangle, folded with sharp, geometric precision and placed to the left of the fork. Then there are the glasses. The water goblet, made of lead crystal with a thumbprint pattern, sits exactly above the tip of the knife. If there were wine, it would sit to the right of the water, forming a diagonal line that leads the eye toward the center of the table. In the center sits the salt and pepper shakers, a matching set of silver birds. They must be placed as a pair. To separate them, according to the etiquette books, was to create an unnecessary reaching hazard for the diners. Everything is symmetrical. Everything is still. The table is a landscape of order in a chaotic world. Helen returns to the kitchen to begin the plating. This is where the sensory world of the 1950s housewife becomes most immersive. She picks up a dinner plate. It is warm. She had placed the stack of porcelain in the warming drawer earlier. In this era, a cold plate was considered a grave hospitality error. A warm plate kept the gravy fluid. It kept the steam rising. She carves the roast. The knife makes a soft, rhythmic shur against the meat. She places 2 thick slices in the center of the plate. She adds a scoop of mashed potatoes, using a silver server to create a perfect mound with a small indentation in the center for the butter. She adds 3 carrots, aligned perfectly parallel to one another. Now comes the most rigid rule of the dinner ritual, the master's priority in the 1950s household. The husband was always served first. This was not merely a tradition. It was a formal acknowledgement of his role as the provider, even if guests were present or children were hungry. The first hot plate always traveled from the kitchen to the head of the table. Helen lifts the plate. It is heavy. She can feel the heat radiating through the porcelain into her palms. She walks into the dining room, her heels making a soft, rhythmic click, click, click on the hardwood floor before being muffled by the thick pile of the area rug. She approaches Arthur from his left side. This is the left-hand rule of service. Food is always presented from the left and cleared from the right. She lowers the plate. As it nears the table, a cloud of steam rises, carrying the rich, savory scent of the roast directly to him. The plate meets the table with a tiny, musical clink. "Here you are, dear," she says softly. She does not wait for a thank you. In the hierarchy of the 1950s meal, her service is expected to be as silent and efficient as a law of nature. She returns for her own plate. Then the children's. Finally, she sits. The meal begins in a state of quiet, disciplined appreciation. The sounds are repetitive and soothing. The tink of a silver fork against porcelain. The soft hush of a knife slicing through tender vegetables. The rhythmic glug of water being poured from the crystal pitcher. The conversation is governed by the rule of lightness. Helen knows that this is the time to soothe the masculine spirit. She does not mention that the washing machine made a strange grinding noise that morning. She does not mention the bill from the doctor. Instead, she speaks of the neighbor's new rose. She speaks of the weather. Forecaster settled front, moving in from the west. She watches Arthur as he eats. She monitors his progress with the predatory grace of a hawk. When his water glass reaches the halfway mark, she rises silently to refill it. When the bread basket is emptied of its first layer, she replenishes it with warm rolls. She had kept tucked under a cloth in the kitchen. This is the invisible hand of the housewife. The meal must seem to replenish itself. The butter should never be allowed to run low. The salt should never be out of reach. As she eats, Helen practices the quiet chew. Etiquette manuals of the time emphasized that a woman should never appear hearty in her appetite. She takes small, precise bites. She rests her fork between every third mouthful. She dabs her lips with the corner of her napkin, soft, rhythmic pat, pat, but ensuring that her lipstick remains as intact as possible. The steam from the food begins to dissipate, leaving behind a cozy, lingering warmth in the room. The shadows of the candles dance on the wallpaper, pattern of pale blue flowers that seem to sway in the flickering light. Once the main course is finished, the clearing ritual begins. This is a moment of high tension disguised as calm. The rule: no plate should be stacked at the table. Helen rises. She picks up Arthur's plate with her left hand and his salad plate with her right. She carries them to the kitchen. She does not stack them in the dining room, as the sight of soiled porcelain was considered unappetizing for those still seated. Click, click, click goes her heels. Whoosh goes the swinging door to the kitchen. In the kitchen, the soundscape changes. It is no longer the delicate tink of silver. It is the functional, rhythmic clatter of the backstage. She places the plates on the counter. She scrapes the scraps into a small, lidded tin with a soft thwack. The water roars for a second, white noise that fills the small room before she turns it off. She must be quick. The rule of the desert gap states that the table should not remain empty. For more than 3 minutes, she prepares the coffee. The percolator has been bubbling on the stove throughout the meal, a rhythmic, percussive plip-plop. Plip-plop sound that is the heartbeat of the 1950s kitchen. She pours the dark, hot liquid into thin china cups. The steam rises in a narrow vertical column. She carries the tray back into the dining room. The transition to dessert is a softening of the day's edges. The heavy silver is replaced by smaller, more delicate spoons. The savory scents are replaced by the smell of coffee and perhaps a simple sponge cake. The tension in Arthur's shoulders has visibly melted. The house has done its job. The meal has been a success. As Helen sits back down with her coffee, she feels a strange, quiet exhaustion. It is not the exhaustion of physical labor, though she has done plenty of that. It is the exhaustion of constant calibration. Every movement at the table was a calculation. How loud was the clink of the spoon? Was the butter at the correct room temperature? Did she greet the husband's story with the appropriate level of hushed interest? Behind her practiced smile, there is a soft, rhythmic pulsing in her temples, but she does not show it. She does not rub her head. She does not sigh. The etiquette manuals warned. A wife's fatigue is a shadow on the home's sun. So, she holds her coffee cup by the delicate handle. She feels the warmth of the porcelain seeping into her fingers. She watches the candle flames sink lower in their silver sticks. The room is very quiet now. Outside, the blue of the evening has turned to a deep ink black. A light rain has begun to fall, a soft, rhythmic patter, patter, patter against the window pane. It is a comforting sound, a sound that says the world is being washed clean. The dining room has settled into that particular, heavy stillness that follows the main course. The candles have burned down by an inch, their wicks curling into charred hooks, and the wax has begun to form translucent, frozen waves against the silver bobbicks. In the 1950s, this was the hour of the attentive ear. As Helen sits across from Arthur, the dessert plates, small, delicate circles of bone china painted with pale blue cornflowers, sit between them. The cake is a simple chiffon, light and airy, but to Helen, the atmosphere feels dense, as if the room itself is holding its breath. There is a rule, etched into the bedrock of mid-century marriage manuals, that governs this exact moment. A wife should be a refuge of silence. It was suggested that a man, having spent his day battling the loud, abrasive world of commerce and industry, should return to a home where his voice is the primary melody. The wife's role was to be the accompaniment, the soft, rhythmic chord that supports the tune but never seeks to lead it. Helen watches Arthur as he speaks. He is recounting a minor frustration at the office, something about a filing error or a missed shipment. She leans slightly forward, her chin resting gently on the knuckles of her right hand. She maintains eye contact, a soft, unwavering gaze that signals, "I am here. I am listening." Behind this gaze, however, is a vast, silent landscape of her own thoughts. In the quiet of her mind, Helen is busy. She is thinking about the damp patch she discovered behind the pantry door this afternoon. She is thinking about the way the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, looked at her over the fence today, look that felt like a question she couldn't quite answer. She is thinking about the dull, persistent throb in her lower back from leaning over the tub to scrub the tiles. But the rule is absolute. Avoid the laundry list of complaints. To speak of these things would be to burden the breadwinner. In the etiquette of 1956, a woman's domestic struggles were meant to be invisible. If she spoke of the leaking pipe or the exhaustion of the Monday wash, she was seen as failing to maintain the sanctuary of peace. So, she filters her words. It is a slow, rhythmic process, like water passing through a fine silk mesh, thought. The butcher overcharged us for the roast, and I had to argue with him for 10 minutes. Filter, dissolve. Result, silence. Thought, I feel a strange, hollow loneliness when the house is too quiet at 3 o'clock. Filter, a raise. Result, a small, encouraging nod. Arthur pauses his story to take a sip of coffee. The silver spoon clicks against the side of the cup. Tinker, rhythmic, metallic heartbeat. Is that so, dear? Helen asks. Her voice is a soft murmur, carefully modulated to be lower in pitch than his. It sounds as though you handled it with great patience. She watches the way his shoulders relax at her words. She sees the tension leave his jaw. This is her craft. She is the emotional architect, building a space where he feels wise, capable, and heard. The cost of this building is her own silence. The etiquette of the gentle inquiry. The conversation continues in a predictable, soothing loop. In the 1950s, a wife was taught the art of the leading question. She was not to offer her own opinions unless specifically asked, and even then, she was encouraged to frame them as reflections of his own. What do you think the next step should be? She asks. She already knows what the next step should be. She had thought of it 3 minutes ago while he was mid-sentence. But to offer the solution directly would be a breach of the fragile ego rule. Instead, she leads him toward the conclusion as if she is walking him through a garden, letting him believe he discovered the path himself. Inhale, wait, exhale, listen. The sensory details of the room anchor her. The smell of the cooling coffee, slightly bitter and toasted. The feel of the heavy damask napkin against her lap, a weight that reminds her to keep her legs crossed at the ankles. The sight of the dust motes dancing in the periphery of the candlelight, a reminder of the work that awaits her tomorrow. She finds a strange, hypnotic peace in this restraint. There is a safety in the silence. If she does not speak her own frustrations, they almost feel as though they don't exist. If she focuses entirely on the rhythm of his voice, her own fatigue becomes a distant, muffled sound, like a radio playing in another house down the street. The no-complaint policy the dessert plates are cleared. The rule of the cheerful countenance takes full effect, even if she had spent the day in a battle with a malfunctioning toaster or a difficult stain. The dinner table was a complaint-free zone. Complaining was seen as a lack of gratitude for the life she had been given. It was considered unfeminine to be disgruntled. Helen picks up a crumb from the tablecloth with the tip of her finger. She presses it into the fabric, then lifts it. Press, lift, press, lift. She thinks about how much she wanted to tell him. About the book she started today, a novel, about a woman in a different city, living a different life. She wanted to describe the way the prose made her feel like she was breathing colder, crisper air. But she looks at Arthur. He is leaning back, satisfied. He is at peace. If she introduces her own world, her own excitement, or her own intellectual hunger, might disrupt the equilibrium. It might require him to work to understand her. So, she keeps the book in the closet of her mind. She locks the door. Would you like another half cup, darling? She asks. The clink of the porcelain. The dark, swirling liquid. The rising steam. These are the sounds of her communication. She speaks through service. She speaks through the precise placement of the cream pitcher. She speaks through the fact that the coffee is exactly the temperature he prefers. The house begins to feel very small, very warm, and very quiet. Inside Helen's head, a different conversation is happening. It is a faster, more vibrant dialogue. I am more than the coffee. I am more than the roast. I am a person who wonders why the stars look different in October. I am a person who remembers the way the wind felt on the pier before we were married. I am tired of the smell of lemon wax. But on the outside, She is the image of suburban serenity. She smooths the lace on her cuff. The texture is intricate, a series of small, repetitive loops and knots. It mirrors her life, a series of small, repetitive duties that, when viewed from a distance, create a beautiful, orderly pattern. She realizes that her silence is the glue holding the room together. If she were to speak her truth, if she were to say, "I am exhausted by the performance," the walls might not fall, but the sanctuary would vanish. The illusion would break. And in 1956, the illusion was everything. The meal is officially over. "I'll take the tray," she says, her voice a soft, melodic punctuation to the evening. As she carries the dishes to the kitchen, she passes the hallway mirror. She sees herself, the navy dress, the pearls, the unwavering smile. She looks like a portrait of a woman listening in the kitchen, away from his gaze. Her face finally relaxes. The muscles around her mouth soften. Her eyes lose their alert brightness. She stands over the sink, letting the steam from the hot water rise up and dampen her skin. She listens to the sound of the evening. Paper rustling in the other room. Crinkle, snap, in the living room. He is the voice of the world. In the kitchen, she is the silence of the home. She begins to wash the dessert. Plates, swish, rinse, dry, swish, rinse. Dry. The etiquette books said that a wife should listen with her heart. Helen realizes that listening with her heart often means silencing her own. She finds a rhythmic comfort in the task. The porcelain is smooth. The water is warm. The house is safe. She thinks of the rule. A man's home is his castle. A woman's home is her masterpiece. A masterpiece is meant to be looked at, not to speak. It is meant to evoke a feeling of beauty and order. She dries the last cornflower patterned plate. She turns it over in her hands. It is perfect. It is silent. Helen returns to the living room. She does not sit in the big chair. She sits on the sofa, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Arthur reads a headline aloud. "The economy is looking up," he says. "That's wonderful news, dear," she responds. She doesn't ask how the economy affects the price of the milk she buys. She doesn't ask what it means for the future of the neighborhood. She simply accepts the statement as a gift of information. The clock on the wall continues its steady, rhythmic count. Tick, tick, tick. The rain has stopped outside, leaving the world dripping and quiet. The air is cool and smells of wet pavement and damp earth. Inside. The lamp casts a soft, yellow circle on the rug. Helen feels her eyes growing heavy. The effort of the day, the cleaning, the dressing, the plating, and finally, the listening is settling into her bones like a soft, heavy silt. She is a reservoir of the day's secrets. She is the keeper of the unspoken. Imagine the house now, as the night deepens. The two figures in the living room are like a still life. The man with his paper, the woman with her silence. There is no conflict here. There is no loud disagreement. There is only the soft, rhythmic hum of a well-oiled machine. The etiquette has been followed. The rules have been kept. You can feel that same stillness in your own room now. The need to speak, to explain, to justify it is all fading away. The world doesn't need your voice tonight. It only needs your breath. Inhale and be still. Exhale and be silent. The candles in the dining room have been blown out. The kitchen is dark. The silver is tucked in its velvet-lined box. The transition from the evening's quiet conversation into the morning's industrious, Silence is a bridge made of silver polish and soft cotton rags. It is now the following morning, a Tuesday, and the house has returned to its most demanding state, the state of the perpetual exhibit. In the mid-1950s, there was a rule of domestic conduct that felt more like a physical law than a social suggestion. A home is a reflection of a woman's soul. A speck of dust is a stain on her character. Helen stands in the center of the entrance hall. The morning light is sharp and clear, unforgiving in the way it strikes the surfaces of the mahogany console table and the brass umbrella stand. This is the hour of the deep clean, a ritual that is as much about rhythm as it is about hygiene. To clean was not merely to remove dirt. It was to perform a meditative act of devotion to the structure that housed her life. She begins with the dusting. This is not a hurried flick of a cloth. It is a slow, deliberate choreography. She uses a soft, yellow flannel cloth, aged until it is as supple as skin. She starts at the top of the bookshelf and moves downward. A rule of gravity and etiquette alike. Reach, wipe, fold. Reach, wipe, fold. The sound is a rhythmic, dry hush, hush, hush as the flannel moves across the spines of the books. She lifts each volume, the encyclopedias, the cookbooks, the Reader's Digest anthologies, and wipes the shelf beneath them. She does not skip the corners. To skip a corner was to harbor a secret, and in 1956, a housewife's home was meant to have no secrets from the sun. Once the dust is banished, the living surfaces must be fed. Helen retrieves the tin of paste wax. It is a heavy, circular tin with a pry-off lid that smells of turpentine and ancient forests. She takes a fresh rag, twisting it into a firm, rounded bud. She dabs it into the wax and begins to apply it to the dining table, the same table that held the silent dinner of the night before. The motion is circular, round and round, small circles, then large. She watches as the wood transforms. The dull, matte finish begins to deepen into a dark, liquid amber. She can see her own reflection beginning to form in the grainer, blurred, ghostly version of her face, framed by the white of her morning apron. This is the rule of the mirror shine. A surface was not considered truly clean until it could reflect the light of a single candle or the face of a guest. The physical effort is steady. She feels the pull in her shoulder, the rhythmic tension in her forearm. But she does not rush. She allows the scent of the wax to fill her lungs, a sharp, grounding aroma that signals the house is being protected as she works. She thinks of the etiquette of the unexpected guest. In this era, the doorbell was a constant, unpredictable threat. A neighbor might drop in for a cup of sugar, or a husband might bring home a colleague without a moment's notice. The rule was absolute. The home must always be prepared for a surprise inspection. This meant that the cleaning shift had to be invisible. If the doorbell rang, Helen had exactly 30 seconds to hide the wax tin, toss the rag into the utility closet, smooth her hair, and appear at the door as if she had been sitting in the parlor all morning, perhaps just finishing a light letter to an aunt. The house had to look effortless, even though every square inch of it was the result of a calculated battle against the elements. The cleaning moves from the surfaces to the void. Helen retrieves the vacuum cleaner. It is a heavy, chrome-plated machine with a long, pleated hose that looks like a prehistoric lung. She plugs it into the baseboard outlet with a satisfying click. When she flips the switch, the quiet of the morning is replaced by a deep, resonant hum. It is a low-frequency vibration that she feels in her teeth. a sound that drowns out the ticking of the clocks and the chirping of the birds outside. She moves the floor nozzle in long, overlapping strokes, forward and back, forward and back. The rhythm is hypnotic. She watches the pile of the rug change color as the brushes lift the fibers. One direction is a pale, silvery sage. The other is a deep, mossy green. She ensures the lines are perfectly straight. In the 1950s, vacuum lines were the hallmark of a disciplined household. They were the visible tracks of a woman who had patrolled her borders. She moves into the kitchen. Here, the floor is linoleum, a checkerboard of cream and charcoal. She uses a mop with a heavy, galvanized bucket. The wringer makes a rhythmic, metallic clack-clack as she presses the water from the cotton. Head, swish, mop, ring, swish, mop, ring. The smell of pine, oil and hot water rises in a cloud of steam. The floor is wet, a shimmering mirror that catches the light from the window. Helen stands in the doorway, waiting for it to dry. She cannot step on it. To leave a footprint on a damp floor was to undo the morning's logic. She stands perfectly still, her hands resting on the handle of the mop. She watches the water evaporate, the shine turning from a liquid gloss to a hard, protective shell. Cleaning was not just about the removal of dirt. It was the curation of order. Helen approaches the linen closet. This is a space that no guest would likely ever see. Yet the rules of 1950s etiquette stated that internal order is the foundation of external peace. A messy closet was a sign of a fragmented mind. She removes the towel's thick, thirsty stacks of peach and white. She refolds them. The edges must be tucked in. The folds must be facing the front. The stacks must be graduated by size bath towels on the bottom, hand towels in the middle, washcloths on top. Fold, pat, stack, fold, pat, stack. The rhythm of the folding is like the turning of pages in a book. It is a soft, muffled sound, the friction of terry cloth against terry cloth. She organizes the spice rack in the kitchen. The small tin cans with their colorful labels are aligned so that the text is perfectly horizontal. She wipes the rim of the flour canister. She ensures the silver spoons in the drawer are nested within one another like sleeping birds. There is a strange, quiet power in this organization. By controlling the placement of every spoon, every towel, and every spice tin, Helen is asserting her authority over the world. Outside, the world might be complicated. The papers speak of satellites and cold wars, but inside this closet, there is only the peach stack and the white stack. Everything is in its place. Everything is known by noon. The heavy work is finished. The house is a masterpiece of hygiene. But now, the second rule of the morning takes hold. The transition into the ready state. Helen goes to the bathroom and washes the scent of pine and wax from her hands. She uses a translucent bar of pear-scented soap. She scrubs her fingernails with a small, stiff brush until they are pink and perfect. She changes her apron. The work apron, the one with the faint damp patch from the mop, is replaced by a morning hostess apron. This one is sheer, with a scalloped edge and a small, embroidered butterfly. She checks the emergency hospitality kit. In the pantry, she keeps a tin of English tea biscuits and a jar of expensive preserves. They are never to be eaten by the family. They are the sacrificial offerings for the unexpected guest. She ensures the kettle is filled with fresh water. She ensures the good china cups are at the front of the cabinet. She sits in the living room. She does not relax in the modern sense. She sits with her back straight, her hands in her lap, perhaps holding a piece of mending. She is waiting. She is waiting for the doorbell. She is waiting for the test of her character. The house is so clean, it feels fragile. The air is still. The only sound is the rhythmic swing, swing, swing of the pendulum in the hall clock. If a guest were to arrive now, they would find a woman who appears to have been born into a spotless world. They would see the shine on the table, but they would not see the wax tin. They would see the straight lines in the rug, but they would not see the heavy chrome vacuum. This was the ultimate etiquette. To serve is to hide the effort of service. The afternoon stretches out, a long, golden ribbon of time. Helen moves through the rooms. Performing the spot check, she picks up a single leaf that has blown in through the screen door. She straightens a picture frame that is tilted by a fraction of a degree. She puffs a pillow that has lost its mountain-like peak. The house is her instrument, and she is constantly tuning it. She feels a deep, rhythmic satisfaction in the order. The clink of the ice in her water glass is a lonely, clear sound in the silence. The smell of the pine oil is fading, replaced by the scent of the sun-warmed wood and the distant smell of a neighbor's laundry drying on a line. She thinks of the rule. A clean house is a quiet house. Dirt, to the 1950s mind, was noise. It was a distraction. It was a failure of focus. By removing the dirt, Helen has created a vacuum of peace. She finds herself moving more slowly now. Her footsteps are lighter. She doesn't want to disturb the perfection she has created. She is a curator in her own museum, walking through the galleries of her life. The morning's labor has been transformed into an evening's atmosphere. The mahogany table is no longer a piece of furniture. It is a pool of dark light. The rug is no longer a floor covering. It is a field of disciplined texture. The house is no longer a workplace. It is a sanctuary. The sun begins its slow, rhythmic descent. The golden rectangles on the carpet stretch and fade, turning into long, violet shadows. The house is at its peak. It is spotless. It is organized. It is ready. The afternoon sun hangs suspended like a heavy gold coin over the suburban canopy. It is a Wednesday, the day of the midweek walk, a time when the invisible threads of the neighborhood are pulled tight, woven together by 1,000 small observations from behind sheer lace curtains. In the mid-1950s, the boundary of the home did not end at the front door. It extended to the very edge of the sidewalk, and the air itself was thick with the silent weight of the neighborhood gaze. There was a rule more powerful than any town ordinance that governed every step Helen took outside her kitchen. You are the ambassador of your husband's success. To appear in public was to be on trial. A scuff on a shoe, a child with an unbuttoned coat, or a garden with a single encroaching weed was not just a domestic lapse, it was a public confession of a crumbling interior life. Helen stands by her front door, checking her reflection in the small oval mirror in the foyer. She is wearing a structured suit of pale lavender wool. The fabric is thick and silent. She adjusts her hatter small, tilted pillbox with a delicate veil that stops just above her eyelashes. She takes a slow, steady breath. Inhale and compose. Exhale. Unmasked, she is about to step onto the stage. The front door opens with a soft, well-oiled click. As Helen steps onto the porch, she feels the immediate shift in the atmosphere. The private silence of her lemon-waxed hallway is replaced by the expansive, watchful quiet of the street. The sidewalk is a grey ribbon that binds the houses together. As she walks, Her heels make a rhythmic, hollow sound against the concrete. Ting, ting, ting. It is a lonely sound, but she knows she is not alone. She passes the house of Mrs. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling is known for her hydrangeas and her long look. Helen can see the slight movement of the Venetian blinds in the Sterling rhythmic clap-clap as the slats are tilted just enough for a pair of eyes to verify that Helen is, indeed, wearing her gloves today. Rule: a lady is never truly dressed without her gloves. Helen's gloves are white kidskin, soft as a petal and smelling faintly of the chalk used to keep them bright. She keeps her hands folded at her waist as she walks. She does not swing her arms. She does not rush. To rush is to appear harried, and to be harried is to be disorganized. She encounters Mrs. Gable at the corner. Mrs. Gable is pushing a high-wheeled perambulator, the chrome wheels spinning with a soft, rhythmic whir, whir, whir. "Good afternoon, Helen," Mrs. Gable says. Her voice is bright, but her eyes are performing a rapid, vertical scan hat. Pearls, hemline, shoes. "Good afternoon, Dorothy," Helen replies. Her smile is the one she practiced in the hallway, a gentle, agreeable curve that reveals nothing. The conversation that follows is a masterpiece of 1950s subtle inquiry. "I didn't see Arthur's car in the drive until quite late last night," Mrs. Gable remarks, her tone light, almost melodic. "I hope everything is well at the firm." This is the gossip of concern. It is an interrogation disguised as a neighborly thought. Helen knows that if she admits Arthur was working late because of a mistake, or heaven forbid, a disagreement with his boss, the news will travel the length of the street before the sun sets. It will become a cloud over their house. "He's just so dedicated, Dorothy," Helen says, her voice steady and rhythmic. "The new accounts require a bit of extra care, but you know Arthur, he wouldn't have it any other way." She has defended the perimeter. She has maintained the image of the successful provider. The rule of the neighborhood was simple: conflict is a private shame. If Helen was angry, she had to swallow it until it became a hard, cold stone in her stomach. If she was sad, she had to paint over the sadness with a fresh layer of evening rose lipstick. To be anything other than agreeable was to be difficult, and a difficult woman was a social pariah. She continues her walk toward the local market. The trees, young maples and elms, are planted at precise intervals. Their shadows create a rhythmic pattern across the pavement. Light, dark, light, dark. She thinks about the quiet judgment of the bridge club last week. One of the women, Betty, had arrived with a faint, poorly concealed smudge of flour on her sleeve. The conversation had stalled for a heartbeat. No one mentioned it, but the silence that followed was heavy, a collective indrawn breath of pity. Betty had been found out. She had allowed the labor of the kitchen to leak into the social world. Helen looks down at her own sleeves. They are immaculate. She feels the subtle tension in her neck, a rhythmic pulsing that she tries to breathe away. The pressure to be perfect is not a sudden weight. It is a slow, constant accumulation, like the fine layer of dust that settles on a piano. You don't notice it minute by minute, but by the end of the day, it covers everything. She enters the grocery store. The bell above the door gives a cheerful ring. Inside, the air is cool and smells of sawdust and floor wax. The aisles are long, colorful corridors of tin cans and cardboard boxes. The labels are all facing forward, a rhythmic army of Campbell's and Del Monte. She picks up a head of lettuce. She examines it. She knows that even here, she is being watched. The grocer, Mr. Henderson, notes which housewives buy the prime cuts and which buy the economy bundles. The choice of a steak is a statement of a husband's salary. Helen selects the choice, ribeye. She places it in her wire basket with a soft thud on the walk back. Helen takes the long route, passing the newer homes on the hill. These are the houses of the rising men. The lawns here are even greener, the paint even whiter. She notices a woman, younger than herself, weeding her flower bed. The woman is wearing a sundress and a straw hat. She looks tired. She is leaning heavily on her trowel. Helen feels a sudden, sharp pang of empathia, rhythmic throb of recognition. She wants to stop. She wants to say, I know. The dirt is stubborn. The sun is hot. You don't have to smile today. But the rule of polite distance intervenes. To acknowledge the struggle is to embarrass the If Helen points out the fatigue, she is pointing out a crack in the young woman's mask. Instead, Helen adjusts her gloves. She lifts her chin. Your petunias are coming along beautifully. Helen calls out, her voice sweet and distant. The young woman jumps slightly, then immediately straightens her posture. She wipes a smudge of dirt from her forehead, leaving a faint streak behind. She forces a bright, brittle smile. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Miller. There's such a joy. The two women exchange a look of profound, silent understanding, buried under layers of etiquette. They are both soldiers in the same invisible war. They both know the rules. Helen moves on. The interaction leaves a lingering weight in her chest, slow, rhythmic ache. She thinks about the gossip chain. If she were to mention to Mrs. Sterling that the young woman on the hill looked a bit overwhelmed, it would be the talk of the Tuesday tea. It would be framed as a lack of stamina. So, she keeps the observation to herself. She tucks it away in the same mental drawer where she keeps the leaking pantry pipe and the mid-afternoon loneliness. The architecture of the perfect lawn as she nears her own house. Helen examines her property with the cold eye of a stranger. The grass is trimmed to exactly 2 inches. The hedges are clipped into soft, rounded clouds. The porch furniture is aligned to face the street at a 45-degree angle. This is the public face of the private life. In the 1950s, a messy yard was seen as a sign of a husband who had lost his grip on his responsibilities, or a wife who had lost her grip on her husband. The garden was the evidence of their stability. Helen notices a stray candy wrapper that has blown into her driveway, a bright, jarring piece of red cellophane. She feels a sudden, rhythmic surge of anxiety. How long has it been there? Has Mrs. Sterling seen it? She bends down, her lavender skirt rustling, and snatches the wrapper. She hides it in her gloved hand, clenching it until the cellophane crinkles. Crinkle, crinkle. It is a small, ugly sound in the quiet afternoon. She enters her house. The door closes, and the neighborhood gaze is finally cut off. She leans against the door for a moment, her eyes closed. The silence of the hallway rushes in to meet her. It is a relief, but it is also a different kind of pressure. Now, she is alone with the mirrors. She removes her gloves. Her hands are slightly damp. She peels them off, finger by finger snap. Snap, snap. She lays them on the console table. They look like 2 white, empty shells, in the quiet of the late afternoon. The voices of the neighborhood remain in Helen's head. What did Dorothy mean about Arthur's car? Was the lavender suit too much for a Wednesday? Did I smile long enough when I saw the young woman on the hill? This was the true, strange rule of the era. You must be your own most rigorous judge. The social pressure was not just external. It was internalized until it became the very rhythm of her thoughts. She didn't need Mrs. Sterling to tell her the rug needed vacuuming. She could feel the imaginary judgment of the neighborhood pressing against her skin like a change in barometric pressure. She walks to the kitchen to put away the groceries. The steak goes in the refrigerator. Click. The lettuce goes in the crisper. Slide. The red cellophane wrapper goes into the trash. Buried deep beneath the coffee grounds, she feels a rhythmic, pulsing fatigue in her feet. She wants to take off her shoes. She wants to sit at the kitchen table and let her shoulders slump. But then she looks at the window. The neighbor's house is only 20 feet away. The curtains over there are thin. The afternoon sun has reached its most languid point, casting a heavy, honeyed glow across the living room rug. It is Thursday, the day Helen has designated for the formal call. In the 1950s, hosting was not a casual invitation to share space. It was a highly stylized performance of generosity where the hostess was the invisible stagehand, the director, and the lead actress all at once. The primary rule of mid-century hospitality was as unyielding as the corset beneath Helen's dress. The guest is the sun, and the hostess is the silent moon that reflects their light. This meant a strange, demanding paradox. The guest must feel entirely prioritized, their every whim anticipated before they even realize they have one. Yet, the work required to achieve this must be entirely hidden. A hostess who looked tired, or heaven forbid who mentioned the effort of baking the petits fours, was considered a failure. To show the seams of your labor was to make your guest feel like a burden. Helen stands in her kitchen, her movements governed by a slow, rhythmic precision. The kettle is on the stove, a heavy, copper-bottomed pot that has been polished until it glows like a fallen star. Hiss, rumble, pop, that the water is beginning to reach its first boil. Helen does not wait for the whistle. A whistling kettle is too sharp, too sudden for a quiet afternoon. She watches for the first wisps of steam to curl from the spout, rising in a gentle, rhythmic dance toward the ceiling. The preparation of the tea tray is a study in functional beauty. In 1956, a tray was not just a carrying device. It was a curated landscape. Helen lays a small hand-embroidered linen cloth over the silver tray. The cloth is white, with a delicate shadow work border of lilies. It is perfectly flat. She smoothed it earlier with a small travel iron, ensuring that even the folds from the linen closet were erased. She begins the placement ritual. First, the teapot. It is a heavy, floral-patterned porcelain piece. She warms it first with a splash of hot water, swirling it around, swish, swish, swish to ensure the ceramic doesn't shock the tea leaves. Then, the cups. They are eggshell china, so thin that when Helen holds one up to the afternoon light, she can see the shadow of her own thumb through the porcelain. Clink, clink, clink. She places them on their saucers with a rhythmic, musical touch. Next, the silver sugar tongs. The small crystal bowl of lemon slices, each one seeded and cut into a perfect, translucent crescent. And the tiny pitcher of heavy cream. The rule of anticipated need dictates that she must provide for every possible preference without asking. To ask, "How do you take your tea?" was acceptable, but to have the lemon, the cream, and the sugar all within the guest's reach before they could ask for them was the mark of a true hostess. She arranges a plate of crustless cucumber sandwiches. They are tiny, green-rimmed rectangles, precisely 2 inches long, She had patted the cucumber slices dry with a paper towel 3 times to ensure the bread would not become damp. Pat, pat, pat. The sandwiches are arranged in a perfect radiating circle, like the petals of a flower. The doorbell rings. It is a 2-tone chime that echoes through the hushed house. Helen feels the familiar, rhythmic tightening in her chest, the hostess alert. She takes a moment in front of the kitchen mirror. She checks her eyes. They must look bright. They must look refreshed. The strange rule of the era was, a hostess must never appear tired, even if she had been up since 5 in the morning, even if her feet were throbbing in her heels. She had to project a sense of boundless, effortless energy. To look weary was to suggest that your guest's presence was an exhausting chore. A tired face was a rude face. She pinches her cheeks. She applies a fresh layer of coral rose lipstick. She smooths her apron. She opens a door. Mary. "How wonderful to see you," Helen says. Her voice is pitched in that hostess octave slightly higher, melodic, and entirely devoid of the day's domestic grit. She leads her guest, Mrs. Gable from down the street, into the living room. As they sit, Helen ensures that Mary is given the good chair, the one with the best light and the plumpest cushion. Helen herself sits on the edge of the sofa, her posture a masterpiece of alert relaxation. She is leaning in, her body language saying, "You are the most important person in this room." The tea service is a rhythmic, sensory experience. Helen brings in the tray. The silver handles are cool against her palms. She places it on the low coffee table with a silence that seems impossible for metal and glass. She begins to pour. The tea hits the bottom of the cup with a soft, hollow splash, then rises in a darkening amber pool. The scent of bergamot and steam fills the air, a clean, floral aroma that signifies the afternoon pause. Pour, lift, stop, pour, lift, stop. She offers the sugar tongs. The silver claws grip a single white cube. Click, she drops it into the tea. She stirs it with a tiny silver spoon, moving it in a circular motion that never touches the sides of the cup. A hostess never makes a clinking sound while stirring. It must be a silent whirlpool. As they talk, Helen practices the controlled response. Mary is talking about her daughter's piano lessons. Helen listens with an intensity that borders on the devotional. She nods at the correct intervals. She offers small, encouraging murmurs. Inside, Helen is monitoring the room. Is Mary's cup getting low? Is the napkin slipping from her lap? Is the sun shining too directly into her eyes? The host must be a silent guardian. Helen rises, almost ghost-like, to adjust the sheer curtain by 1/2 an inch, softening the light on Mary's face. She does it so smoothly that the conversation doesn't even stumble. "It must be so rewarding to hear her progress," Helen says. Her voice as smooth as the silk drapes she just touched. The rule of the unseen effort as the hour passes. The rhythmic clatter of tea time continues. The rule of guest priority means that Helen must never lead the conversation toward herself. If Mary asks, "And how are you, Helen?" the response must be brief, cheerful, and immediately redirected. "Oh, just wonderful, thank you. The garden is finally behaving itself. But tell me more about that trip you're planning." Helen's own life is a secondary topic. To dwell on her own thoughts or her own day would be to steal the light from the guest. She feels a dull ache in her lower back, the result of the morning's floor waxing. She ignores it. She doesn't shift her weight. She doesn't lean back into the sofa. She maintains the hostess arc, the slight forward tilt of the body that signals engagement. The sensory details of the room begin to blur into a comforting, repetitive haze. The hush of the wind in the trees outside, the clink of the teacup meeting the saucer, the soft rustle of Mary's taffeta skirt. Helen watches the level of the tea in the pot. It is getting low. She knows she must go to the kitchen to fetch more hot water, but she must do it in a way that doesn't feel like a departure. "I'll be just a moment, dear. I have a fresh batch of lemon curd I've been dying for you to try," she says. She doesn't say, "I need to go get more water." She frames the exit as a new gift for the guest in the kitchen. For 30 seconds, Helen is alone. The mask of the refreshed hostess slips for just a heartbeat. She leans her forehead against the cool, white enamel of the refrigerator. She lets her shoulders drop. She breathes in the smell of the damp tea leaves and the cold lemon. The silence of the kitchen is a sharp contrast to the social sound of the living room. Inhale and release, exhale and reset. She checks the kettle. She refills the teapot. She wipes a single stray drop of tea from the silver tray. She remembers the rule from the Gourmet Hostess Guide. Your guest should feel as though they are the only person in the world, and you are their most devoted servant. She straightens her back. She lifts her chin. She puts the smile back on the one that reaches the corners of her mouth, but stays carefully out of her eyes. She returns to the living room. "Here we are," she says, her voice as bright and fresh as if the day had only just begun. The afternoon begins to lean into the evening. The golden light turns to a pale, dusty mauve. Mary begins the departure ritual. In the 1950s, leaving was as choreographed as arriving. There were the first indications, a glance at the watch, the second movement, gathering the handbag, and the final transition, standing up. Helen follows the rule of the reluctant goodbye, even if she is dying for the visit to end so she can take off her shoes. She must act as though Mary's departure is a small tragedy. "Oh, must you go so soon? I feel as though we've only just started," Helen says. She walks Mary to the door. She stands on the porch as Mary walks down the sidewalk. She waves a slow, rhythmic movement of the hand. She waits until Mary is 3 houses away before she steps back inside and closes the door. The click of the lock is the final note of the performance. The house is suddenly, profoundly quiet. The living room is a theater of used things. The half-empty teacups, the crumpled linen napkins, the tiny crumbs of cucumber sandwiches on the rug. Helen stands in the center of the room. The hostess energy drains out of her like water from a cracked vase. She feels the full weight of her fatigue, now a heavy, rhythmic pulsing in her feet and her head. But she does not sit. The rule of the ready home still applies. She must clear the tray. She must wash the eggshell china. She must vacuum the crumbs. She picks up the tray. The silver is heavy.